Okay, everyone, I think we're ready to get started. So let me start by saying welcome. I'm Jim Schwartz. I am the current board president of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you this evening to our Andrews Series lecture. Should be really, really interesting, featuring Debra Winegarten. And this is made possible through the generosity of the Andrews family locally. So I saw several of you here, thank you. And yes, that's great. I really appreciate the ability to provide this interesting ongoing lecture series to the community. So let me tell you a little bit about our speaker this evening, Debra Winegarten. Born and raised in Dallas, Texas, Debra earned 2 degrees in sociology. She co-authored with her mother, Ruthie Winegarten, the biography of Dr. Leona Tiny Hawkins, one of the first African Americans in Texas to own a nursing home. Debra's second book was Catherine Stinson, The Flying Schoolgirl, a story of the 4th U.S. woman to obtain her private pilot's license in 1912. This book was a finalist for the Forward Magazine's Book of the Year Award. Her third book, Mum's the Word, arose from a secret project Debra pursued where she snuck over to her mother's house while Mom was out of town and Xeroxed all 3 of her mother's Rolodexes. She sent 256 self-addressed stamped envelopes with a request to send back a story about her mother. And she got back 140 replies. And then she wrote the same people back and asked them to pre-order and prepay for the book she was writing so that she could publish the book. They did, and she presented the book to her mother on her mom's 72nd birthday. Her mother didn't remember most of the stories, but she said they sounded like things that she would have done. There's Jews in Texas. Debra Weingarten's 4th book won the 2011 Poetica Magazine National Competition. Debra works for the University of Texas at Austin's Astronomy Department. She also teaches sociology at South University. Her 5th book, Oveta Culp-Hobby, Colonel, Cabinet Member, Philanthropist, was just released from UT Press in March of this year. A devout Jew, Debra attends Conservative Synagogue in Austin, Texas. Shares her life with her heart partner, Cindy. They are both owned and supervised by many cats. I didn't practice that line, sorry. But I'm sure the cat lovers in the audience can relate to that. Her work can be ordered from www.sociosites.com, and her most recent books will be available for sale tonight, as well as our own book, Spoken Memories, which is a collection of really fascinating and wonderful oral histories that have been collected by the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Debra Winegarten.
Hat courtesy of Ruth Andrews. I unfortunately have to give it back. I was like, no, can I keep it? So I guess you've probably already figured out that chutzpah is my middle name, so maybe it will or won't go home with me tonight. Thank you so much for coming. This is a homecoming for me. I live in Austin now, and I've been trying to get to Dallas to do a book launch of There's Jews in Texas ever since it came out. It came out in January 2012. Look how long it took me, but here I am. And such a treat to be here tonight. How many of y'all are native Dallasites? Look at this. I love that. Me too. How many of you knew my mother, Ruth Weingarten? Look at that. How many of you introduced my mother, Ruth Lewin, to my father, Al Weingarten? Ginger Jacobs did that. And it's a really great story, that I'm here at the Jewish Community Center of Dallas because Ginger was the activity director of the community center in South Dallas. And my father, Al Weingarten, when he's here in the audience, when he moved from New York, he thought he should go maybe see if he could find a wife. So he went to the Jewish Community Center. And Ginger, who knew my mother since they were 5 and 6 years old, introduced them. So really that I'm at a Jewish Community Center with the matchmaker, my parents, and my mother's no longer with us, but my father's here, is, you know, when I was thinking about this last night, I was just crying about it. How sweet it is that I could come and tell this story with you. So thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to do my best to entertain you, and we're going to have a great time. So you, of course, know there's Jews in Texas, and you're probably wondering, like, why the heck did this woman write this book and name it that? So I'm going to tell you the story first. I'm a poet and an author, and a friend of mine about 3 years ago sent me this email. She's like, Debbie, there's this poetry contest there's for contemporary Jewish poetry. She said, you write some, you ought to enter it. I'm thinking, well, that's a good idea. I think I will. So I looked to see when the contest deadline was, and of course it was like 2 weeks from when I got the email. I'm like, really? You gave me 2 weeks? Thank you so much. Fortunately, though, creativity, if you don't know this, is spurred by finish lines. So actually it was a good thing. So I like fumed and ranted, and I had taken this workshop called How to Write an Award-Winning Chapbook. And here's what they said. Put your first poem first, and put your best poem last. And then right in the middle, put your best poem, and that way if it opens in the middle, there's your best poem. And then all around it, put in your best poems. So I went through my little collection of poetry, and I pulled out the best ones I could possibly come up with, and then I put it together, and I'm like, now what am I going to call this thing? And so I looked to see where the judges were, because you know you got to go for the judges. Well, they were in Norfolk, Virginia. So as I was falling asleep that night, I was thinking, what am I going to call my book? Norfolk, Virginia. Do they know there's Jews in Texas? And of course, then I had to leap out of my bed, and the cats are going, there she goes again, as I'm running through my house to my computer, because you have to write down those ideas when they hit you, because you know they're gone in the morning. So I made it, there's Jews in Texas. I don't know if you can see this. And does anyone here know what a chapbook is, what that means, what this form of book is, like where it was originated or the story? Anybody? It's okay, not a pop quiz. So chapbooks actually originated in England, and people called chapmen would go around selling small monographs and small books and pamphlets and brochures, so that's where this came from. Now, I don't know if you can see this picture on the cover. We've got them in the back and you'll be able to see it. But this is actually a picture of Charlie Hoffman. Do we have any of his relatives here in the audience? Okay, not here. And so Charlie Hoffman came through Galveston. He got off the boat, and there's 2 versions of the story. I'll tell you the version I heard, and then of course there's a different one, as all good Jewish stories are. He ran to the photographer. He borrowed the chaps. If you look closely, these are sheepskin chaps. Nobody wears sheepskin chaps. And he borrowed the hat and the bandana, and he had his picture taken to send to his fiancée back in Russia to say, look, I made it, I'm safe. And of course, then he married someone else. So when I asked his grandson, I'm like, hey, can I put your grandpa's picture like on the cover of my book? He's like, you know, he was a bit of a scoundrel. I think he would like it. So here you have it. And I must say that there are not very many people who have someone wearing chaps on the cover of their chapbook. That's like, you know, all my poet friends are really jealous. They're like, really, girl? I'm like, you know, you do what you got to do. So, just want to give a shout out to my good friend Debbie Jacobs too. I see Linksman in the audience. We grew up together as kids. I spent many a Friday and Saturday night and weekends at their house. So these are like my first cousin. You know, Ginger's like my Aunt Debbie's like my first cousin but sister of my heart. So, and we were both named Debbie. We both have brothers named Mark. We thought our parents did that on purpose, so we were supposed to marry each other's, you know, it didn't work out that way. 2nd grade, part 2. Being 8 years old means walking alone to the Skiller's drugstore at the Park Forest Shopping Center. with my weekly allowance quarter sealing a hole in my already sweaty shorts pocket. I know what I'll buy. The latest Superman or Batman comic book, whichever one came in that week and doesn't already live in the pile on my nightstand at home. With my new Superman comic slipped in the sleek paper bag, top carefully folded so my sweaty hands don't ruin my treasure, a grown man stops me on the sidewalk, eyeing my Star of David necklace and asking if I'm Jewish. When I nod yes, I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, he tells me, "That's really too bad for me because didn't I know that Jews burn in hell when they die?" Tears falling so hard I could barely see, I dropped my weekly treasure and ran home to Mom so fast, I thought I might keel over before I got to her and be snatched right down to hell. When I told Mom what happened, she put both hands on my shoulders, knelt to my height where she could look square in my eyes, and in that Dallas drawl of hers said, "That's okay, honey, don't worry. We're Jewish. We don't believe in hell." Permission slip, 1966. Oh, look, and there's Mark Jacobs in the back, too. So nice to see you, Hayden. In case of an atomic bomb dropping on downtown Dallas, A, by the way, this is a true story. A, keep my child at school and I will pick him up in my car. B, keep my child at school until the attack is over. C, let my child walk home. Ridiculous, my mother declared, tearing the note in tiny pieces. In case of an atomic attack, we will all be dead. I told my third grade teacher I lost the note. I've been lying for a very long time. So now I'm going to tempt you a little bit. There's Jews in Texas was so successful. You know, usually if you sell like 100 copies of a poetry book, people are like, "Hey, that's awesome." I've sold 800 copies of that book so far. So you know y'all are going to be going home with some books tonight, so get ready. Because for me, I'm a pretty good writer, but I love the schmoozing and the marketing. A book is just a schmoozing delivery device. So my book, Where Jewish Grandmothers Come From, you see there's a theme here, just came out yesterday. So it's like literally hot off the press. I'm so excited. And I already have the title for my third one, which hasn't come out yet because I put all my best poems in this one. And it's called Have Torah Will Travel. So you know, it's so good. So on the cover of this book, because you know books are all about the covers, do we have authors in here? Nonfiction authors, writers, good. So I'll tell you a secret. They say that if on your cover you have someone looking out at you, people are more likely to pick it up. So I figured, look, if I have 3 people, it's got to be good. But really, you should look at what I have on the back of this cover because it's a fantastic. I want to put this on the front, but you have to see it. It's so good. All right. So staying with the atomic bomb theme, did any of y'all remember duck and cover? Did any of y'all have to do that? Yeah. Let's see. Oh, there's so many good poems in here. I'll do this one. After the Bomb, Dallas, Texas, 1967, Thomas C. Gooch Elementary School. A 3rd grader ponders why she has the gift of perfect pitch. A curse, really. People's off-pitched singing grates like lions' roars in her ears. And that photographic memory for music of hers, also a curse. Like the time she set the state capitals to a song so she could memorize them the night before the test, only to forget which song she used when test time came. I remembered at the last minute. Or her earlier insight that if an atomic bomb was dropped, all the music would be lost and someone would have to remember all the songs. Never thinking that if an atomic bomb was dropped, she too would be lost. And this one is the title poem for this book. It's called Where Jewish Grandmothers Come From. How many Jewish grandmothers does it take to change a light bulb? Never mind, I'll just sit in the dark. I know, you've heard that one before. Yeah. North Dallas, 3rd grade, 1967, Christmas time, 3rd period before lunch. I don't remember where I learned that God would strike me down with lightning if I said the Jesus word even in a song. So when the whole music class went caroling in the halls the last week in December, I sat in the dark classroom alone, crying, where Jewish grandmothers come from. This one is for my grandma Celia. She lit candles for dead people several times a year, and 2 white candles for Shabbat every Friday night. She said it was to welcome the Sabbath Queen. I thought we must not be royalty because the Queen never stopped at our house. I remember the smell of cooking gas in her apartment, and schmaltz and burnt brisket, and the sweet lavender smell of her bed sheets when I stayed over after Friday night services. And how proud she was to introduce us, her grandchildren. We were the smartest, the prettiest, the cleverest. She told everyone, even us, which was so embarrassing because, well, we knew it wasn't true. You know, the nice thing about reading Jewish poems for a Jewish audience is I don't have to explain things and y'all laugh in the right places. And you know, there's not really a lot of Jews in Texas. So to have so many of you in this room, just being here is just such a treat for me because I travel all over Texas reading my poems, and usually I have to like do a little glossary beforehand. So it's so good. Carrying Torah on Rosh Hashanah. The rabbi went first. I watched as the 2 rows of congregants parted before him like the Red Sea at Moshe's bidding. I dove in behind him, hugging the Torah tightly against my breast and right shoulder, the sacred scrolls becoming my second skin. My friends' faces loomed large on either side of me as they eagerly reached their hands for a respectful touch of Hashem's gift. And as I strode through the sea of smiling faces, I realized this must be what entering heaven is like, where all the people you have ever loved come forward to welcome you. Kol Nidre 5773 in honor of Gerald Tank Ribbonet. The old man gazed across the chapel, his eyes fixed on the woman who had shared his life in bed for 65 years. His parchment-like skin matched the pages of the Torah, but unlike the ancient words of text, it was unlikely he would see another year dawn. And so he drank in the sight of his wife. The strength of his love for her steadied his trembling limbs as he memorized the lines in her face. Good, huh? Alrighty. Yeah, never let it be said that I don't have self-confidence. Alrighty. So, this one, you know, my friends now are kind of afraid to even play with me because they're like, you know, they could end up in a poem in my next book. Sociology 101, first night of class. I wanted to like him, this 20-something ex-Marine, young enough to be my son, too young for the things he's seen. His cragged smile creased his face, reflecting back the horror buried deep in his eyes, his giggle belying his past. What broken scene makes a man reify murder, causes him to gloat as he recounts his fun, shooting turtles on a friend's 20-acre ranch? What makes him wish he was an infantryman because they get away with bursting through doors and killing whatever moves? What mother ever raised her son to be this monster? Laughing as he talks of killing, as though it's a picnic in the park. And I, his Jewish sociology teacher who takes her sacred obligation, thou shalt not murder, seriously, prays for a resocialization miracle. You know, one thing that's I love about poetry is that you can have those conversations about things that most people won't have conversations about. Also why I love teaching sociology, because I get to talk about racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia. I mean, it's like, when I get my paycheck, I'm like, they pay me to do this? Because I obviously just do it apparently naturally. Okay, back to this one. Now, do we have anyone under 18 here? All right, just checking. There's just a little there's just a little scatological language at the very end here, so just warning you. So if you don't, just warning you. Passing. When I was 16, I got to play the voice of God in my Sunday school confirmation play. From there, I went on to impersonate doctors on a regular basis. Like the time at Emma Long Park, when a teenager was dragging his distressed puppy into the water. I marched right over and said, "I'm a vet, stop that right now. You are doing serious damage to your dog." Wearing a bathing suit, I couldn't be expected to have my license with me, so I passed. Or when I had to reach the lawyer to answer whether the medical power of attorney gave me permission to let my sister die. I said I was a doctor just to get through the receptionist. Now she calls me Dr. Winegarten whenever I ring them up. The best story, of course, was my good friend Catherine D. Unger, who saw teenagers tormenting a kitten near a gas station trash can. Pulling her pistol out of her car's glove box, she put it in her purse, walked over, and calmly said, "Put the cat down." "Who are you?" one acne-faced boy sneered. Pulling out her gun, she pointed and said, "I'm the fucking cat police. Put the cat down." They dropped the kitten and ran. How are you doing? You're good? You're good? We'll change gears. You should never give up a good captive audience. So just a couple of announcements. I'm the president of the Texas Jewish Historical Society. I know some of you are also members of that. Yay, oh, thank you. I paid them to do that. And we are having our conference in Austin. We're having a joint conference with the Southern Jewish Historical Society. It's in Austin this October. It's a fantastic lineup. I have some flyers back at the back table when you come to buy my books. If you want to pick up a flyer, you should also.
When is it?
It's October 23rd through 26th in Austin. It's going to be great. It's also the same weekend as the Texas Book Festival. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. I'm going to be running from one to the other. I'm so happy. And for those of y'all who knew my mother, I also have some bookmarks from her memorial foundation after she passed away almost 10 years ago. She wrote 18 books on women in Texas history, and her friends and co-authors formed a foundation to carry on her work for women in Texas history. So I have some of that. And Ruth Andrus reminded me that what was your husband's name?
Dave.
That Dave Andrus and my mother went to SMU together. They actually collected poll taxes and registered people to vote. That's what I remember. And then she reminded me that they were very far left, like 2 of the 5 communists probably in Texas at the time. And I just want to give a shout out for my new book on Ovida Kopabi. There is nothing at all Jewish in here except that it's by a Jewish author. But do any of y'all remember Ovida Kopabi? Is that name familiar at all?
Bill Hobby. Bill Hobby's what?
It's Bill Hobby, the lieutenant governor's mother.
Yeah.
So she was like the brains behind the operation and of the media empire. She was the first woman appointed an Army colonel. She designed the Women's Army Corps for World War II. And then they said, "Would you come run it?" And she's like, "No, I'm running a Houston newspaper. I got 2 small kids." Her husband's like, "You know what? You go do that. Your country needs you. We'll take care of this." So she did. She ran the Women's Army Corps. And when she was there, Eisenhower loved her so much that when he became president, he appointed her to his cabinet. So she was the second woman in the U.S. to be appointed to a cabinet level position. Anyway, This book just came out 2 weeks ago. It's already in its second printing. Imagine that. I'm so happy. So, and it's written for 7th graders. So if there's people in your life that you think would benefit from this, you should get a copy. All right. So I promised that I would get y'all out of here while there was still some time left, and I'm going to close with this poem, but I'm going to take some questions if there are some, and then we'll have this. There's more food. Y'all should stay and schmooze. You should come meet me. It's going to be great. I'm so happy. Yes.
Just a comment. I'm really curious why you asked about 18-year-olds in the audience. They would be the ones talking like this.
You know, you're so right. I'm going to have to remember that. Thank you. So this final poem is about a trip that I took to Egypt several years ago. It was right before the revolution. When we came back, some friends said, "Did you start that?" I said, "Who wants to know?" Maybe I did. No, I didn't. This is called Hineni. Looking at the two almost elderly women, I knew instantly, mishpacha, no doubt about it. There was a certain something as they, time zone fatigued, gathered their suitcases. Sisters, I wondered, noting how close they stood to each other. No, not that. They were too uncomfortable together. But something kept drawing me to them as if I knew them. Maybe not from this time, but I knew them all the same. I'm always on the lookout for Jews. It's almost an instinctual response, like the duckling looking for its mother. They're nodding on the front row. They're like, well, yeah, we do it too. Are you my people, I wondered? But more than that, there was an inner knowing. You are my people. We are from the same tribe. It wasn't until days later on the Nile riverboat when I learned their grandparents were from Grodno, where my great-grandmother was born. The one woman I was drawn to instantly carried an air of sadness and isn't quite rightness the entire part of our journey. Sitting together at breakfast, I asked her how she happened to come on the trip and why wasn't she having more fun. Roz said her husband died 2 years ago this week, and her sister-in-law's husband wasn't well enough to come. And her own daughter said, "No, so what better else you have to do?" And so she came, begrudgingly, unwillingly, alone. Mel would have loved this trip, she declared, tears bursting like the Nile from both eyes. I talked about how sad I was after Mom died, that for years nothing was fun, and I lost my laugh, and how afraid I was I would never find it again. And my days of crying, slogging my way to Minyan, therapy, exercise, Minyan, fighting my way back from the grief underworld. After that, I made a point to spend a little time with her each day, listening, touching, witnessing, reassuring her that sadness is also part of being human. Our last day together in Cairo, I hired a car, and we 5 Jews on the tour plus 2 friends went to the Ben Ezra Synagogue, the shul of Moses Maimonides, medieval philosopher. Roz and I walked in together and stood speechless, turning to each other with tear-filled eyes. "It's so beautiful," we said at the same time in awe. The regular caretaker had the day off, so an Egyptian man struggled to give us a tour. "No pictures, no praying. Women used to be upstairs only." No praying? I thought, that can't be right. This is a synagogue, for God's sake. Now, maybe I'd been away from Minyan for too long, but I thought, who's going to be mad at me for praying? God? And marched up front and chanted the Shema as loud as I could. The next thing I knew, Artie said to Mort, "Let's say Kaddish for Mel. It's his your site." And so we 5 Jews from bus A began the prayer. And the little Egyptian man came over and moved the rope barrier so we could get closer to the bima. Uh-oh, we don't have a minyan, I thought, as the tourists around us broke into silence, listening to our prayer. But our prayers got louder, not quieter, as more voices joined in. 2 from Florida, 2 from Philadelphia, 1 from New York. I like to think of it as the miracle of the Minyan. There in Moses Maimonides' Shoal in Cairo, Egypt, where the Jews heard their own call to prayer and answered. Thank you very much. Anybody been to that shoal?
Yes.
It's amazing, isn't it? The Ganesha's there, everything. So we have a few minutes. I'll just entertain a few questions if you have them. Someone has a question? Yes.
Yeah, it said that you were the only Jew that went to your school. What was that, an elementary school or?
In my elementary school, it wasn't that I was the only Jew in my elementary school. I was the only Jew in my classes in elementary school. And I had a Catholic music teacher who found out I had perfect pitch, and so she just loved me. She's like, you know, and she was like, she kept saying, "You have this connection to God." I'm like, "You have a connection." She's like, "No, you really do." And so it was I played it for all it was worth. You know, if you can get on your teacher's good side, but yeah. Yes.
Did you find as, you know, in that particular circumstance, the only Jewish kid in your class, but in other places throughout your life, living in Texas and, you know, generally the Southwest, that you've had to help people understand what that means, that there are Jews here, and you know, we didn't come yesterday, and we didn't all come from New York.
Right.
And
you know, I found that in all my travels. I went to Ohio State University, and I was a teaching assistant for sociology, and there were a lot of kids from rural Ohio towns, and one of my students came up the last day of class and said, "You know, I've been watching you all quarter long, and I just can't figure out, where are they?" I'm like, "Okay, where are what?" She wanted to know where my horns and tail were. And I wanted to say, you know, "Come to my office, I'll show you where they like burned them off at birth." But I didn't. I just said, "Come to my office and we'll talk about it." And I asked her, "What, you know, where did you even think that this came from?" She said, "Well, we just all knew it growing up, and we grew up on the farm, and there were no Jews in her town, there were no blacks in her town. I mean, it was just this town of very homogenous people." And and as I've traveled around sharing my stories, people tell me stories. I mean, y'all raise your hand if you have a story. Yeah, I mean, it's the common thing, and the experience that we have of being minorities is comparable. That whole thing about having to educate people. I just, you know, I'm a little slow, but I just had this realization 2 days ago that it's the same thing that African Americans have when we say stupid things about them. You know, it's that same experience, you know, and I mean, how many of you have just ever gotten mad when someone says, like my housekeeper a couple weeks ago said, "Oh, you're having Passover. Look at that, it falls during Holy Week. It's Holy Week for you too." And I just wanted to say, "How dare you?" But I realized that no, she was really trying to connect with me. It wasn't that, but it was an ignorance thing. And so it's the same way but I don't think it's necessarily a Jewish thing. I think it's a minority thing, you know, so I have to do this one because it's just crying out to be said. Second grade, part 1. In far north Dallas in the early 1960s at Thomas C. Gooch Elementary School, we sat in rows alphabetically by last name, Mark Washington in front of Debra Winegarten. And our locker assignment came in that order too. So when the only Jew, me, was assigned a locker with the only Negro, him, I naturally thought they were putting the Negro and the Jew together because we had to look out for one another. And I've been trying to do that ever since. But it's that same thing of minority status. How many of you have found yourself sticking up for other minorities? And I think it's the Passover thing too, isn't it though? All those that are oppressed, you know, and that's why we keep getting kicked out of every place. Because, you know, when something's not right, we go and say, "Excuse me," and then they're like, "You know what, Jew, out of here." So, but we won't stop doing that. Yes?
So I'm sure you know this, but I find around Passover, explaining to people who are not Jewish that Easter is the only holiday that the non-Jews use the lunar calendar, because Easter and Passover have to match up. They just have to match up.
Right, because it's, right,
Historically.
right.
So if you say to somebody, when is Christmas, they can tell you straight out December 25th. If you ask them when Easter is for next year, they don't know till they look at the calendar.
Right, right. And there's actually some Christian denominations that only celebrate, that they wait for it to actually fall during Passover so that it makes sense that it happens according to this story. Other ones don't. So because Easter and Passover don't actually always coincide the way historically for them it's supposed to. Yes, Maureen.
Debbie, I wanted to thank you for mentioning Gerald Rubinet. Now, if these people don't recognize the name, that's Tank Rubinet. Everybody knew him as Tank. He was a great friend, a wonderful man, a committed Jew, and his loss is still very fresh. And I thank you for mentioning it.
You're welcome. Yes. Yes.
And only because he brought up Tank, I have to tell you that he signed my ketubah.
Tank signed your ketubah?
Tank signed my
Wow.
ketubah in Austin.
Yeah, that's so great. That's so great. Yes, Ginger.
How did you decide to start writing?
How did I decide to start writing? Well, you know, in third grade at Temple Emmanuel, their newsletter printed my poem, God is Everywhere. So you could say that started me writing then. But actually, my current iteration of writing started after my mother died. And I was heartbroken. And my mother wrote 18 books on women in Texas history. So I thought I would just follow in her footsteps and keep writing. But after she died, I was so heartbroken I couldn't write. And so I started writing poetry. And some of it is very bad. We call it therapy poetry. It should never see any place except maybe the therapist's office. A few of those poems I actually put in my latest book because I think it's important to have the conversations about that. My mother actually killed herself. And as you may know, when someone has the act of suicide, it's very stigmatizing for the people that are left behind. And so, you know, I did everything. I should actually read you this poem because one of the reasons I decided to put some of these poems in this book is because I wanted to be able for people to have the conversation, especially now with the whole military suicide, with all these veterans that are coming back that are very messed up. You know, it's in the conversation. I mean, how many of you know someone who killed themselves? Can I just see a show of hands? They say, for looking around the room, almost everybody, they say for everyone who has, they say don't commit suicide because it's like committing a crime. So everyone who's killed, it affects at least 6 other people, but we don't talk about it. So how could you begin to figure out how to heal if you don't talk about it? So let me just, I wasn't going to do these, but let me just do 1 or 2 because we'll do these 2. Give and take. The sages tell us that it is God who decides when we live and when we die. Each year, our fate inscribed in the book of life on Rosh Hashanah and sealed on Yom Kippur. When Mom got so sick, I tried everything. Every doctor I could think of, every qualified, competent professional I could muster, and then she died. I was so mad when God decided to take Mom because I didn't think God needed Mom more than I did. I never stopped to think what I know now to be true, that it was Mom who needed God.
Interesting answer.
You know, that's what good therapy does for you. It helps you figure it out. It's tough. Visitation. Mom Mom walked right up to me and asked if we could buy a new table for her to work on. Those of you who knew my mother knew that would be something that she would say. 75% for work, 25% for dining. I gave her back her gold watch, placed it on her wrist, resisting the urge to ask where she'd been for the last 9 years. She looked as good as ever, her smile as wide as Texas, filling the room with a glow like the August sun the day she was born. I wanted to show her my new manuscript and my award-winning chapbook, our new house, the cats. Instead, the alarm on my cell phone woke me up. Yes?
I'd like to do a little fact checking. When you were reading or telling the story about the note that came home about choice A, B, and C, I remember that so well. Me too. But I don't think your memory's that well, so I think you had a second copy of that note. Mom tore up one, but you kept one many years later.
I love that. Somehow, yeah. No, it was only in my memory. I just made the whole thing up. I mean, the incident happened, but I don't remember what was on the note.
Jim mentioned you're in astronomy and sociology.
Right.
What classes do you teach?
So I teach sociology, I teach introduction to sociology. I work in the astronomy department, hence the stars. You can see I love that. And I took that job about 6 years ago when we were spending $1 billion a day in Iraq, and I thought, I better go get a real job. My mom was always like, get a real job. So I got a half-time job in the astronomy department. So I have an administrative job. So I don't actually do things about the stars, but I get paid to go to McDonald Observatory every year, so you should not feel sorry for me.
Tell them what you told me about your dad being fired.
Oh.
If you want to.
Yeah, well, she's bringing up the whole commie thing again. And, my dad, when he married my mom, my dad's an aeronautical engineer, and so he had a security clearance, and he worked for Chance Vought, and one day they called him out and they gave him his walking papers and they wouldn't tell him why. They're like, pack up your desk, you're out of here. And then a month later he got another job because he had a wife and 3 kids to support, and he got fired again, and again they didn't tell him why. And it wasn't until last year when he was reading a book about my mother, and there was this whole conversation, that he realized it was because of her communist activities at SMU and UT that he lost his security clearance. It was during the McCarthy era, so yeah. But fortunately, he changed jobs and careers and was a very successful sign engineer. And God willing, he's great. He just celebrated a birthday. We won't say which one, but we're still glad he's here. And he just brought a brand new car. I mean, life is good for my dad. So.
How did he figure that out? Did he get something in writing that told him that was why, or how did he figure that out?
No, he just read an article about my mother where that was disclosed. And I just want to give another shout out for the center and the singles group. I mean, my father met my mother here 20 years later after they were divorced, and he was ready to marry again. He came back to the singles group, and he met his second wife, Phyllis Putter. Some of y'all may have known her. Wonderful woman. She passed away 3 or 4 years ago. We miss her terribly. I'm not saying that my dad is on the market again for another wife, but I'm just saying that he's here. So he just bought a new red car. And I love my dad. He's a good guy. All right. So I think we'll wrap it up. I'm going to run back there. There's Jews on Texas. It's a special for you tonight. It's only $5 because I flew and I don't want to schlep all the books back. Where Jewish Grandmothers Come From is $15, and Ovita is $16, and we take cash, credit cards, checks, your firstborn male cat. No, we don't take cats. But that's it. So thank you very much.
Wasn't that wonderful? Let's do one more time. Let's bring the hand. We got the room until 9, so please don't feel like you have to be in a rush to leave.
8:30.
I'm sorry, 8:30. And we can push it a little bit. Thank you again for coming. Thank you to our 2 new members this evening. You set the example. If you are a member of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, we're delighted that you are. If you're not, we would love for you to consider joining our group and supporting the good work that we do. And again, thank you for coming in.
So I do what you were saying.